President Zelensky handed me a folder that I took from him then. It was the result of a conversation I had with him just about a week earlier in Munich, asking for evidence, if he had any, of American manufacturers' parts and components in weapons used by Russia on the battlefield in Ukraine. The folder that he handed me was a powerful indictment of our export control and sanction system. A really searing piece of evidence that contained a listing of 211 American-manufactured, high-technology chips, semiconductors, and other American technology in numerous missiles and other high-technology products used to kill Ukrainians on the battlefield. I'm going to ask that this folder be made part of the record without objection. Of those 211 separate components, 87 were made by just 4 companies: Intel, Analog Devices, AMD, and Texas Instruments. But they are just the 4 leading sources of American technology going into the Russian war machine. The simple truth is that a vast number of United States parts and components are found in Russian weapons recovered on the battlefield. American manufacturers are fueling and supporting the growing and gargantuan Russian war machine. And they are used in missiles, drones, munitions, and other weapons of war. The Russians are relying on American technology. Our sanctions system is a sieve. Our export control regime is lethally ineffective, and something has to be done. That's the reason we're here today. And we're here with 3 experts who can tell us about how these parts can be traced and tracked, how potentially their flow to Russia can be choked, stemmed, and stopped. The evidence points overwhelmingly to the fact that Russia relies on Western technology to power its military capabilities, and United States companies produce the majority of components found in Russian weapons. President Zelensky told me how cutting off Russia's supply of these components is crucial to Ukraine's defense. This stack of documents that he handed to me show that the technology used to fuel Russia's war machine flows through third-party intermediaries and bordering countries. The United States companies know, or should know, whether they violated the law. We are not concluding at this point, but we certainly have questions for them and questions for the United States Department of Commerce and the Department of the Treasury. Russia's success in its efforts to evade export controls can be seen in the very weapons recovered on the battlefield. And I am appalled that American technology breakthroughs are sustaining Russian belligerence. We opened this inquiry last year in order to understand this absolutely astonishing and appalling pattern. We focused on 4 American companies whose products have been repeatedly identified in greater number and frequency as continually and disproportionately showing up in Russian weapon systems. We need to understand how these American products are getting to Russia despite export controls and what more can be done to stop them. Although our inquiry is ongoing, our initial findings show irrefutably that those third-party intermediaries located in countries bordering Russia are used to evade U.S. export controls. This fact is a secret hidden in plain sight. I'd like to enter into the record the subcommittee memorandum that we prepared providing evidence of this fact, and I see no objection. The astronomical increases in exports to Kazakhstan from these four companies, going up 1,000 times from 2021 to 2022, are matched in the same period by exports going to Georgia, 34 times greater, exports to Armenia, 28 times, export to Turkey more than doubled, and exports to Finland were roughly 1.5 times higher. These stark increases are part of a larger trend. We know that other bordering countries outside of these five, notably China, are home to entities being used by Russia to evade our export controls. And I hope this hearing will enable us to understand what more can be used to prevent technology from going to Russia. Russia has been so successful in evading U.S. export controls that its ability to import critical battlefield goods has nearly recovered to levels seen before the invasion of Ukraine. That status quo is unacceptable. This issue is critical not only to defeating Russia, but also beyond that conflict, it has implications for our national security across the globe. Semiconductor export controls are an increasingly important part of our national security. Export controls are one of the ways we hope to maintain our dominant position in artificial intelligence and constrain countries like China from surpassing our capabilities in AI. They're also crucial to our security in other parts of the world, including defending ourselves from overtly hostile regimes like Iran and North Korea. So we need effective semiconductor export controls. Our technology cannot simply be available for whoever wants to access it. The evidence collected from the battlefield in Ukraine can provide guidance to us in defending our national security on technology in many other areas. I hope our work will uncover not just what has gone wrong, but recommendations and solutions to stop future exports of United States technology and from keeping it out of the hands of the Russian war machine. Again, whether there have been violations of law, we are not concluding at this point, but we have strong questions for these companies, and we know that enforcement has been lacking. I commend the Biden administration for imposing additional sanctions, which they announced just days ago. But sanctions are dead letter unless they are enforced. And we are writing to the Commerce Department in a letter that I am also making part of the record today without objection to ask many of these same questions. I turn to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a written opening statement that I'll just ask that it be entered in the record, and I'll just make a couple comments here. In your opening statement, you talked about the growing Russian war machine. I think that's one of the realities that we have to face that we're not really acknowledging. I've been as supportive as I am of the Ukrainian people, as much as I think Vladimir Putin is a evil war criminal. The reality we have to face is that Vladimir Putin will not lose this war. The Chairman talked about defeating Russia. Russia has 4 times the population of Ukraine. They are producing about 4.5 million 155 millimeter shells at a cost of $600 a shell. The West is somewhere around 1 million shells a year at the cost of $5,000 to $6,000. We ought to be doing oversight on that as well, but that's a separate issue. The average age of a Ukrainian soldier right now is 43 years. There are reports, quotes by some of Zelensky's inner circle saying, send us all the weapons you have, we just don't have the men to fire them. Now again, I hate that reality. It's an awful reality. But if we're really concerned about the people of Ukraine, and I don't doubt they want to fight, but if we're concerned about the people of Ukraine, we have to understand what is happening to their country. Somewhere around 100,000 dead, killed in action, civilians, probably more on the Russian side, 500,000 total casualties on both sides. Nobody knows the exact figures. $400 billion to $1 trillion worth of economic devastation of Ukraine. Every day that this war goes on, more Ukrainians die, more Russian conscripts die, and I take no joy in that. There's people yanked out of their villages to be sent as cannon fodder into the front line of a bloody stalemate. More of Ukraine gets destroyed. So I think it's an interesting hearing. I was criticized many years ago when I questioned the ability of sanctions to do what they were really designed to do. That they maybe do more harm, for example, to our allies than they're actually doing. I think that's kind of the record of the sanctions against Russia. They just haven't worked because their war machine is growing. You know, some of the justification for spending $60 billion on funding Ukraine is, oh, it's really not going to Ukraine. It's going to build up our military-industrial complex like it needs more building up. It's going to create jobs in our state. I think that's a pretty depraved justification for supporting Ukraine. So again, we need to look at the reality situation. I know our witnesses here will say that there's all kinds of things we can do to, plug the holes. I doubt it. I saw the chart there. It'll just be Huawei. It'll be other people supplying these things. You have to recognize that reality. I don't like it. But if we're going to drive policy, we need to recognize the reality of things. We keep pushing Russia. They have nuclear weapons. I think our policy ought to be, how do we start reducing tensions in the world? And I would argue that the best way to do that is for America to be strong. And it starts with addressing our debt and deficit. It's out of control. It starts with securing our borders, not letting military-age men from China, from 150 different countries all over the world, into our country unopposed. It's about using our fossil fuel resources rather than artificially drive up our energy costs. It's about stopping deficit spending so we don't continue to drive inflation. That's how you strengthen this country. That's how you make the world a more secure place. So we need to start facing those realities. And as interesting as this hearing may be in terms of, sanctions being evaded, they're always going to be evaded. You plug one hole, another hole is going to be opening up. It's going to be whack-a-mole. So it's a reality we have to face. But we better start facing reality if we're going to start producing public policy that makes any sense in this country whatsoever. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Johnson. I'm going to introduce the witnesses, then swear them in and ask you for your opening statements. James Byrne is the founder and director of the Open Source Intelligence and Analysis Group at the Royal United Services Institute, the world's oldest defense think tank. His team has generated reports based on open source actionable intelligence on Russia's military, supply chains, and worked with government organizations, including the United States Department of State, to help trace and shut down these pathways. Elena Rybakova is the Director of International Affairs, the International Affairs Program, and Vice President for Foreign Policy at the Kyiv School of Economics. She is also a non-resident senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics and Bruegel. Ms. Rybakova has been a co-author on numerous reports out of the KSC Institute examining the continuing ability of Russia to acquire United States technology despite export controls. Damian Spleeters is the Deputy Director of Operations at Conflict Armament Research, an independent research organization that sends investigators to private conflicts to access weapons and other commodities recovered from the battlefield. Mr. Sweeters has deployed to conflict zones around the world, including Iraq, Syria, and Ukraine, to trace the diversion of weapons and commercial commodities. We look forward to all of your testimony. I'm going to ask you to rise and take the oath, as is our custom on this committee. Do you swear that the testimony that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Mr. Byrne, if you would begin.
Chairman Blumenthal, Ranking Member Johnson, it is really a great honor to be here today. Thank you very much for having me and us. My name is James Byrne. I'm the Director of Open Source Intelligence and Analysis at the Royal United Services Institute. RUSI is, as you kindly introduced us, a very old institution. We were established in 1831 by the Duke of Wellington after the Napoleonic Wars. Today we're independent, but for almost 200 years we've worked on questions of military sciences, questions on how to fight and win wars. And today we do many other things than direct military sciences. We do intelligence work, open source intelligence work, financial crime, and a range of other portfolios. Since the war started in Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we have been engaged in work in country. Several members of the Royal United Services Institute have been there many times doing a range of different pieces of work. But one of those pieces of work has been to look very closely at Russian weapon systems, how they're built, and to look at the components within them. When we were first in country, and this was very early on in the nature of the war, the invasion went very badly for the Russians. They expected an easy victory, and they were met with indomitable resistance. They lost huge volumes of platforms, electronic warfare complexes, signals intelligence complexes, tactical radios, missiles were shot down, UAVs were captured. Across this huge range of platforms, we got to look inside of them, and so did a number of other people. What was shocking was that all of these systems that we saw were built with our technology. It is not just US technology, it's technology from the United Kingdom, from the Netherlands, from Germany, from a range of Western countries and our partners and our allies. Nobody had ever seen inside Russian weapon systems before, at this scale, across this breadth. It was something that we hadn't even an inkling of, even during the Cold War. And I think that reality is really quite shocking, that despite all of the rhetoric of the Russian government about import substitution and independence, they rely on our technology to build systems that are designed to threaten us and our allies. Now, irrespective of the progress of the war in Ukraine or, the particularities of the situation on the ground, my belief, and I know many of my colleagues, is that we should do our utmost best to prevent our technology being used in weapons that are designed to kill us and our friends. And this is not simply just a question about Russia. You will hear testimony, I think, later today, but it is not just Russian weapon systems, it's Iranian platforms. It's very recently North Korean platforms. It is technology that fits into those systems that the Russians cannot simply replace. They cannot easily go to other manufacturers of these components because our countries are the most sophisticated manufacturer of these things, and companies themselves create specialized things that are designed to have these roles. Modern weapons platforms cannot work without these things. They are the brains of almost all modern weapons platforms, from precision munitions to missiles to radios to electronic warfare complexes. And so, in that sense, we have great leverage over our adversaries. Now, sanctions are difficult to enforce. Export controls are difficult to enforce, and that is true. We see those components in those weapons platforms, but because it's difficult, it doesn't mean that we should not do it. In fact, we should try our best to make it happen. And of course, there is a selection bias here in that we do not see the shipments of components that we stopped, the vessels that we interdicted, the people that we arrested, because those components never made it, and they never got into those platforms, and they never killed Ukrainians, and they were never used. I know from my experience that that has happened many times. And I think we can do more, and we should do more. And it is not just the role of the United States. It is the role of the United Kingdom. We've been close allies and partners on this for a long time. It is the role of the European Union. It is the role of our friends in Japan and South Korea and Taiwan to assist with this. And we should have as active and as program as possible to prevent this happening. And one last thing before I finish is it's not just a question about microelectronics. It's a question about all sorts of technology that our adversaries need. It's carbon fiber, it's polymers, it's lenses, it's cameras. It's a huge range of different aspects of this story. And if we can prevent them, if we can stop them, as best we can, we help the Ukrainians and we help ourselves from fighting an adversary with our technology down the line. Thank you very much. It's been an incredible honor to be invited here today, and I look forward to hearing my colleagues and answering questions from you.
Chair Blumenthal, Ranking Member Johnson, members of the committee, thank you so much for the opportunity to testify before you today. I'm from Kyiv School of Economics. It's a university that has been a long-standing university with more than 700 students now and more than 70 staff doing research and teaching despite the bombing, sometimes in the shelter, and contributing to our research. I'm also a non-resident fellow at the think tank here in Washington, D.C. and in Brussels, which gives me an opportunity to focus my policy work not just from data analysis, but all the way through the chain to the policy work. So my testimony today is not on behalf of any organization, it's just from me. There are several key messages that I would like to emphasize in my testimony. One, that despite Russia's effort to diversify its military production, it still overwhelmingly relies on foreign components. So national authorities in Ukraine have disassembled a lot of weapons. It's more than 2,800 components at this stage from the whole range of military production. And it's available online. You can look at the photos. You can trace some of them there. So I strongly recommend you look at that website. And it shows that 95% of components comes from the coalition countries. More than 70% from the US alone. And that is because US has a significant advantage in production of some of these innovative technologies, which is fantastic. And it also tells that we have leverage via export controls to put pressure on Russia. The second message is that Russia continues to import significant amounts of these components. In the first months after the beginning of the full-scale invasion in 2022, these imports have halved. So there was an impact. But by 23, we have only 10% reduction in imports of these battlefield goods. The third message is that more effective export controls will require buy-in from our corporates. The success of government policy always hinges greatly on private sector involvement. Decades ago, when we started with the anti-terrorist financing, anti-money laundering measures and financial sector sanctions, US government required buy-in and cooperation of the financial industry. And we saw great success there. The transparency and the ability of the financial industry to block malign actors from accessing our systems has changed dramatically. So we can use the lessons and also use the information from the financial sector industry to be able to help us enforce these export controls. And four, assessing export control circumvention is not just about helping Ukraine. It's not just about preventing Russia from further aggression in Ukraine. It is also about credibility of our whole system of economic statecraft. Malign actors worldwide are watching whether they will be credible or it's just words that we put on paper. It is time to assess what works and what doesn't. We have the opportunity to do sort of homework and see how we can use export controls to effectively address challenges posed by China in strategic technologies. So export controls must be enforced. And my key recommendations for congressional consideration on how to do so are as follows. First, it is critical to strengthen our institutions. They've gotten much expanded responsibilities, but their funding has not been increased to match those responsibilities. Second, we do need to bolster corporate responsibility. Effective control of supply chains must start at the point of production and the initial sale of the item. To incentivize corporations to do so, we need to show that we are capable of enforcing export controls and investigate and impose meaningful fines when necessary. Third, we should leverage the role of the financial industry in global trade. Corporate compliance departments can learn from the banking system compliance department. We have experience of more than 20 years of doing so. And we also can match the information between the two. 4 remaining loopholes in the export controls regime must be closed. We still have work to be done on harmonization of the systems. When the systems are harmonized and the rules are harmonized among us and our partners, it is much easier and more effective for the corporate sector to implement those controls without onerous reporting. Finally, we must improve multilateral cooperation. We should consider a new multilateral export treaty similar to the Cold War COCOM, replacing the existing Wassenaar Agreement, of which Russia is a member and can block any of the control measures. Moreover, the US is a leading actor in export controls. We are the thought leader on export controls, where our institutions are much stronger than those of our allies. So we should encourage our allies to enact legal and institutional changes, facilitating an effective multilateral strategy to undermine the military capacities of Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. Let me conclude by stressing that while export controls have had some effect on limiting Russia's military capacity and production, we must intensify our efforts. Preserving the credibility of our economic statecraft is crucial to send a clear message to malign actors worldwide that their actions will result in severe consequences. I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity to testify in front of you today, and I look forward to questions. Thank you.
Thank you.